Retired military dog breaks out of shelter at midnight. Security footage shows a truth that left the nation in tears. Something wasn't right at the Happy Tails animal shelter that night. Frank Martinez, the overnight security guard, had worked there for 15 years, but he'd never seen anything like this before. On his monitors, he watched as Rex, the newly arrived military German Shepherd, sat perfectly still in his kennel, eyes fixed on the main corridor clock as it ticked toward midnight. The dog's posture was unnaturally rigid, like a soldier standing at attention. "Poor old boy," Frank mumbled to himself, taking a sip of his lukewarm coffee. Rex had arrived just 3 days ago, accompanied by a stack of impressive military credentials and a heartbreaking medical discharge notice. After 8 years of distinguished service, including 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless lives saved, a hip injury had forced the 10-year-old shepherd into early retirement. The shelter had been Rex's temporary home while they searched for someone willing to adopt an older military dog. But Frank had noticed something peculiar about Rex's behavior. Every night, like clockwork, the shepherd would position himself facing east, sitting ramrod straight from 11:45 until midnight exactly. Frank checked his watch at 11:58. On the monitor, Rex's ears suddenly perked up and his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a distant sound that only he could hear. The security guard leaned closer to the screen, coffee forgotten in his hand. That's when it happened. With military precision, Rex rose from his sitting position and approached the kennel door. Frank's jaw dropped as he watched the shepherd's nose work the simple latch mechanism with practiced ease. Within seconds, the kennel door swung open. "Sweet mother of—" Frank scrambled for his radio, but stopped short when he saw what happened next. Instead of making a break for freedom, Rex moved with deliberate purpose, navigating the shelter's corridors like he had memorized the floor plan. The shepherd passed sleeping cats and drowsy dogs without so much as a glance. Frank's fingers hovered over the emergency contact button. By protocol, he should alert animal control immediately, but something in Rex's demeanor made him hesitate. This wasn't a scared animal trying to escape. This was a soldier on a mission. The security cameras tracked Rex's progress through the building until he reached the shelter's east wing. Frank's heart nearly stopped when he realized where the dog was headed: the terminal care unit, where they kept the elderly and severely ill animals in their final days. The overnight nurse had just finished her rounds in that wing. Through the monitor, Frank watched as Rex quietly slipped into room E7 just as she turned the corner. Inside that room was old Charlie, a 15-year-old golden retriever who had been brought in the day before. Charlie was another military veteran, a former bomb detection dog who had saved countless lives in Iraq. The old retriever was in the final stages of cancer, and the shelter's vet hadn't expected him to make it through the night. Frank switched to the E7 camera feed, and the scene that unfolded brought tears to his eyes. Rex approached Charlie's bed with gentle steps, his earlier military bearing replaced by a profound tenderness. The old retriever lifted his head weakly, and in that moment, some kind of unspoken recognition passed between the two dogs. Rex settled down next to Charlie's bed, pressing his body close to his fellow veteran. The shepherd's presence seemed to ease Charlie's labored breathing. For the next hour, Frank sat transfixed, watching as Rex maintained his quiet vigil, occasionally nuzzling Charlie's ear or offering a gentle lick of comfort. At 1:15, Charlie took his last breath, but he didn't die alone. He passed with a fellow soldier by his side, one who had somehow known exactly when and where he was needed. When the morning staff arrived, they found Rex back in his kennel, sitting at attention as if he had never left. Frank handed in his night report with shaking hands, and when the security footage made its way to the shelter's social media manager, something extraordinary happened. The video of Rex's midnight mission went viral, touching hearts across the nation and shedding light on a little-known truth: the deep bonds that exist between military working dogs, and their unfailing loyalty not just to their human handlers, but to each other. But this was just the beginning of Rex's story, and what happened next would change not only his life, but the lives of countless other retired military dogs across the country. The video of Rex's midnight vigil spread like wildfire across social media platforms. But among the millions of viewers, one person watched the footage with tears streaming down her weathered face and trembling hands pressed to her heart. Master Sergeant Sarah Martinez, no relation to Frank the security guard, immediately recognized the distinctive scar above Rex's right eye. She had been there the day he got it, during a rescue mission in Kandahar that had saved her entire unit. "It's him, John," she whispered to her husband, replaying the shelter's footage for the fifth time. "That's my Rex." 3 years had passed since Sarah had last seen Rex. Their separation hadn't been by choice. After Rex's injury during their final mission together, Sarah had been deployed to a classified location while Rex underwent surgery. By the time she returned, he had been transferred. And despite her best efforts, the military bureaucracy and endless paperwork had made it impossible to track him down. The next morning, Sarah stood outside Happy Tail's animal shelter an hour before it opened, her service uniform pressed to perfection. She wasn't taking any chances. She had brought every piece of documentation she could find. Photographs, mission reports, even Rex's favorite tactical training toy, worn down from years of use. Frank Martinez was just ending his shift when he saw her standing there. Something about her posture, straight-backed, vigilant, yet carrying a weight of anticipation, reminded him of how Rex sat every night at midnight. He knew somehow that this was important. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her, "I'm Frank Martinez, the night security guard. I was there when Rex—" He didn't need to finish. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You're the one who let him stay with Charlie," she said softly. "Thank you. You understood what he needed to do." Frank opened the shelter doors early that morning. As they walked toward Rex's kennel, Sarah shared snippets of their story. How Rex had found her, buried under rubble after an explosion, refusing to leave until the rescue team arrived. How he had slept next to her hospital bed during her recovery, breaking protocol but daring anyone to try and remove him. How they had worked together for 6 years, saving lives and protecting their fellow soldiers. But nothing could have prepared Frank for what happened next. Rex was dozing in his kennel, but at the sound of approaching footsteps, his ears twitched. Then Sarah whispered just 2 words, "Sergeant Rex." The transformation was instantaneous. Rex's body snapped to attention, his eyes flew open, and a sound escaped him that was unlike anything Frank had ever heard. Somewhere between a whine and a cry of joy, the shepherd's entire body trembled as Sarah knelt before his kennel. "Request permission to reunite, soldier," Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion. Rex's tail wasn't just wagging, it was whirling like a helicopter blade. When Frank opened the kennel door, Rex didn't bound out like an excited dog. Instead, he moved with deliberate control, despite his quivering muscles, and sat directly in front of Sarah. Only when she opened her arms did he break his military bearing, burying his face in her chest as she wrapped her arms around him. The shelter's staff, arriving for their morning shift, gathered silently in the corridor, witnessing a reunion that would later be described as a testament to the unbreakable bonds forged in service. Someone was filming, the same someone who had shared the Midnight Vigil video. But this time, they captured something even more powerful. They captured the moment Rex, still pressed against Sarah, turned his head to look at Charlie's empty kennel in the East Wing. Sarah followed his gaze, and understanding dawned in her eyes. She had lost track of many of her 4-legged comrades over the years, had attended too many memorial services for dogs who had given everything in service to their country. "You were there for him," she whispered to Rex. "You made sure he didn't die alone." But as Sarah filled out the adoption papers that would finally bring Rex home, neither she nor anyone else at the shelter realized that this was more than just a heartwarming reunion. This was about to spark a movement that would reach the highest levels of military command and change the lives of service dogs across the nation. Because Sarah Martinez wasn't just any veteran, she was now a senator's chief military advisor, and she had spent the last 2 years quietly building a case for reforming the military working dog retirement system. Rex's viral videos had just given her the public attention she needed to make real change happen. And Rex, he seemed to know somehow that his midnight mission had been just the beginning. As he walked out of the shelter by Sarah's side, his posture was once again that of a dog on duty. Because for some soldiers, 2-legged or 4-legged, the mission never really ends. It just takes on a different form. The story of Rex and Charlie's midnight vigil, followed by the emotional reunion with Sarah Martinez, had struck a chord that resonated far beyond the walls of Happy Tail's animal shelter. As the videos continued to circulate, they caught the attention of major news networks, who soon discovered that this wasn't just a heartwarming tale. It was a window into a largely overlooked issue affecting America's four-legged veterans. Jake Thompson, a producer for National News Network, sat across from Sarah in her Washington, D.C. office, watching as she spread dozens of photographs across her desk. Each one showed a military working dog in action, detecting explosives, protecting convoys, saving lives. Rex lay at her feet, still maintaining his protective watch, despite being officially retired. The public doesn't realize, Sarah explained, her voice carrying the weight of years of frustrated advocacy, that these dogs often fall through the cracks after retirement. The military considers them equipment rather than veterans. There's no official support system for their medical care, no guaranteed reunion with their handlers, not even a proper tracking system to prevent them from ending up in shelters like Rex did. She pulled out a thick folder, her proposal for the Military Working Dog Protection Act. For 2 years, it had gathered dust in various congressional offices, deemed non-essential by politicians who had never witnessed these dogs in action. But now, thanks to Rex's viral story, people were finally paying attention. The interview aired during prime time, but it wasn't the polished political piece Jake had initially envisioned. Instead, it became something raw and powerful. The cameras captured Rex, demonstrating his continued dedication, alert and protective even in the peaceful office setting. They filmed him gently accepting treats from veterans in the building who stopped by to meet him, his discipline never wavering despite his retirement. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah revealed something she hadn't told anyone yet. She pulled out an old worn notebook, her deployment journal. Inside was a list of names, dates, and locations. Each entry represented a military working dog who had died after retirement, often alone, sometimes in shelters, their service forgotten. Charlie wasn't the first, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And without proper legislation, he won't be the last. These dogs save thousands of lives during their service. They suffer physical and emotional scars, just like their human counterparts. They deserve better than to be forgotten. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Veterans began coming forward with their own stories. A former Marine shared how his canine partner had saved his entire unit by detecting an IED, only to end up in a civilian shelter years later with no recognition of his service. A retired Army nurse described how therapy dogs, many of them former military working dogs, had helped soldiers cope with PTSD. Rex, meanwhile, had settled into his new life with Sarah, but he hadn't stopped serving. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Sarah would bring him to the local VA hospital, where he seemed to instinctively know which veterans needed him most. He would sit quietly beside their wheelchairs, rest his head on their laps, or simply maintain a watchful presence. Still a soldier, still on duty. One such veteran was James Chen, a former Army Ranger who hadn't spoken since returning from his last deployment. The staff had warned Sarah that James didn't respond to therapy dogs, but Rex approached him anyway, sitting beside his wheelchair with the same quiet dignity he had shown with Charlie. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then James slowly reached out his hand. Rex gently placed his paw in it, a gesture he had never been trained to do, but one that spoke volumes. The nurse on duty later reported that it was the first time she had seen James smile in months. Word of Rex's continued service spread through the veteran community, and soon other retired military dogs were being placed in VA programs across the country. Each success story added weight to Sarah's proposed legislation. Each transformed life another argument for change. But not everyone was supportive of the proposed reforms. As the Military Working Dog Protection Act gained traction, opposition emerged from unexpected quarters. Budget committees raised concerns about costs, military contractors worried about liability issues, and some senior officers argued that treating military dogs as veterans rather than equipment would complicate operational procedures. Sarah knew they were approaching a crucial turning point. The act would soon come up for its first committee hearing, and they needed something more than just emotional appeals. They needed to prove that these dogs' value didn't end with their military service, that they could continue to serve and heal long after their retirement. What happened next would not only change the fate of the legislation, but would also reveal another extraordinary chapter in Rex's story, one that would once again leave the nation in tears, but this time, they would be tears of triumph rather than sorrow. The morning of the congressional hearing dawned cold and clear in Washington, D.C. Sarah Martinez stood before her mirror, adjusting her uniform one last time while Rex watched attentively from his bed. Today wasn't just another hearing, it was their chance to change the lives of thousands of military working dogs across the nation. "Ready for one more mission, partner?" she asked. Rex's ears perked up at her tone, and he moved to stand beside her with military precision. Even at his age, he carried himself with the dignity of a soldier who knew his duty. They hadn't planned on Rex attending the hearing, but that morning, Sarah had received a call that would change everything. James Chen, the veteran who had finally smiled thanks to Rex, had asked to testify. Not only that, he wanted to speak. The hearing room was packed when they arrived. News cameras lined the back wall, and the gallery was filled with veterans, many accompanied by their own service dogs. In the front row sat Frank Martinez, the security guard who had first witnessed Rex's midnight vigil, along with staff from Happy Tail Shelter. Senator William Bradford, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, called the hearing to order. The opposition spoke first: military contractors, budget analysts, and procurement officers. They presented charts showing projected costs, cited regulations about military equipment, and argued that sentimentality shouldn't override practical considerations. Then it was Sarah's turn. She had prepared extensive documentation, statistics, cost-benefit analyses, and detailed implementation plans. But instead of starting with those, she began with Charlie's story. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "I'm not here today to talk about equipment. I'm here to talk about soldiers. Four-legged soldiers who have saved countless lives, who have suffered wounds both visible and invisible, and who deserve better than to die alone in shelters after years of faithful service." The room fell silent as she played the security footage from that midnight vigil. Even the senators who had seemed dismissive earlier watched intently as Rex demonstrated a level of empathy and understanding that defied their classification as mere equipment. But it was James Chen's testimony that changed everything. With Rex lying quietly at his feet, James spoke publicly for the first time in over a year. "I lost my whole unit," he began, his voice rough from disuse. "An IED. I was the only survivor. When I came home, I couldn't find a reason to keep going. Couldn't even find my voice." He reached down to touch Rex's head. "But this dog, this soldier, he knew. Just like he knew with Charlie. He knew what I needed without me having to say a word." James continued, describing how Rex's regular visits had gradually helped him reconnect with the world. "These dogs," he said, "they never stop serving. They never stop helping. And they deserve better than to be treated like obsolete equipment when their bodies get too old to continue active duty." The opposition's carefully prepared arguments began to crumble in the face of such powerful testimony. But the moment that truly turned the tide came during the questioning period. Senator Bradford, known for his tough stance on military spending, asked about the cost implications of treating retired military dogs as veterans rather than equipment. Before Sarah could answer, a commotion broke out in the gallery. An elderly veteran had collapsed, likely due to the stress and emotion of the hearing. As medical personnel rushed forward, Rex broke protocol. With the same deliberate purpose he'd shown that night at the shelter, he made his way through the crowd, creating a calm space around the fallen veteran. He positioned himself protectively, just as he'd been trained to do in combat zones, while maintaining an alert watch that somehow managed to calm the panicked murmurs in the room. The veteran recovered quickly. It had been a minor episode, but the impact of Rex's actions was profound. Without orders, without training for this specific situation, he had demonstrated exactly what Sarah had been trying to prove. These dogs' service didn't end with their military careers. Their instincts, their training, and their dedication continued to serve the nation long after their official duties were complete. As the hearing concluded, there was a palpable shift in the room. The same senators who had been skeptical hours before were now asking about implementation timelines and offering amendments to strengthen the bill. But perhaps more importantly, the nation watching through their screens had witnessed something remarkable. Not just a dog's unwavering dedication to service, but a testament to the enduring bonds between soldiers, whether they walked on 2 legs or 4. Yet even as hope for the bill's passage grew stronger, Sarah knew their mission wasn't quite complete. The final vote was still to come, and Rex had one more role to play in ensuring that no military dog would ever again have to face their final moments alone. The passage of the Military Working Dog Protection Act, now commonly known as Rex's Law, was just the beginning. 1 year after that fateful midnight at Happy Tail Shelter, Sarah Martinez stood on a different kind of stage, Rex faithfully by her side as always, as they prepared to inaugurate the nation's first military working dog retirement center. The sprawling facility, built on donated land just outside Washington, D.C., gleamed in the morning sun. Its design incorporated everything Sarah had fought for: state-of-the-art veterinary facilities, comfortable retirement kennels, rehabilitation areas, and most importantly, dedicated spaces for handler reunions and adoption processes. But the heart of the center was a special wing named in honor of Charlie, a place where elderly or terminally ill military dogs could live out their final days with dignity, surrounded by care and compassion. This morning, Sarah began her speech, her hand resting gently on Rex's head. We're not just opening a building. We're fulfilling a promise to thousands of 4-legged veterans who have served this nation with unwavering loyalty. She paused, looking out at the crowd gathered before her. Frank Martinez was there, having left his security guard position to become the center's night supervisor. James Chen sat in the front row, now working as a counselor for veteran dog reunification programs. 1 year ago, Sarah continued, a security camera captured something extraordinary. We watched as one retired soldier honored another, refusing to let him face his final moments alone. That act of compassion opened our eyes to a truth we should have recognized long ago: that service, loyalty, and brotherhood know no species. The center had already begun its work even before the official opening. In the past month alone, they had facilitated 23 reunions between retired military dogs and their former handlers. Each kennel bore a plaque highlighting the dog's service record, ensuring that their sacrifices would never be forgotten. The rehabilitation program had successfully placed dozens of retired dogs in VA hospitals and PTSD support programs across the country. But it was the Charlie wing that truly embodied the spirit of Rex's midnight mission. Here, retired military dogs would never have to face their final journey alone. Each dog had a dedicated team of caretakers, many of them veterans themselves, ensuring 24-hour companionship. The wing's walls were lined with photographs of military working dogs throughout history, creating a hall of honor for these 4-legged heroes. As Sarah concluded her speech, an unexpected moment captured the essence of everything they had fought for. From the audience emerged an elderly German shepherd, guided by his handler, one of the many dogs who had been rescued from shelters across the country after the passage of Rex's Law. The dog approached Rex with the measured pace of a veteran recognizing one of his own. Rex, still the consummate soldier, maintained his post beside Sarah until she gave him a gentle signal. The two shepherds approached each other with dignity, touching noses briefly in quiet acknowledgement. The moment was caught on camera and would later be described as a changing of the guard. One generation of service dogs passing the torch of honor and care to the next. The impact of Rex's Law extended far beyond the center's walls. Military working dog programs across the country had been reformed, with comprehensive tracking systems ensuring no dog would ever fall through the cracks again. The law mandated retirement benefits, including medical care and rehabilitation, and established clear protocols for handler adoptions. Perhaps most importantly, it officially recognized these dogs as veterans rather than equipment, ensuring they would be honored for their service. Rex himself had become a symbol of this transformation. Though his midnight vigil with Charlie had first caught the nation's attention, it was his unwavering dedication to continued service that had truly changed hearts and minds. Every week he still visited the VA hospital with Sarah, offering the same quiet comfort to veterans that he had given to Charlie in his final moments. As the ceremony concluded and the center officially opened its doors, Sarah knelt beside Rex, now gray around the muzzle, but still carrying himself with military bearing. "Mission accomplished, soldier," she whispered, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw Charlie's spirit in Rex's wise brown eyes. The security cameras at the new center would capture many moments in the years to come: joyful reunions, peaceful passings, and countless acts of loyalty and love. But they would never again need to capture a military dog facing their final moments alone. Thanks to one dog's midnight act of compassion and the movement it inspired, these four-legged veterans would always have a place of honor, care, and respect. As Rex and Sarah walked through the center's doors together, they knew that while their initial mission was complete, their service to their fellow veterans, both two-legged and four-legged, would continue. Because for true soldiers, the call to serve never really ends. It just takes on new forms, touching lives in ways that continue to leave the nation in tears of gratitude and hope.